All right, so it's already the time to get started. I'm Valmir, Senior Test Automation Engineer in the Plan team, part of the Quality Department. And last quarter, we had an AMA to talk about the testing framework, and we decided to have this meeting quarterly. So this is the next one. And we have prepared, like in the document that is in the Google Calendar event, there's a link for the document where you can add your questions if you haven't added them there yet. And we have a brief agenda that we will discuss in the beginning, where we'll talk a little bit about some change in the performance test toolkit and also in the end-to-end test framework. So I will start passing it over to Grant so he can talk a little bit about the latest changes in the performance toolkit.
Yes, so thanks, Walmir. My name is Grant. I'm one of the senior test automations here, and my kind of role is to take charge of the performance testing for GitLab. What we've done recently is that we've actually been building some tools to help performance test GitLab environments. Any one really, it could be a local or it could be a customer environment. And what we found is that we wanted a good tool to do it. So we've actually rebuilt the toolkit to actually build to use a very popular open source tool called K6, which we found to be very performance compared to our last tool. It can handle much more throughput and other things. It's much more modern. It's based on Go, so it was a good move to do. So I won't read out everything that's in the document, but if you're interested, there's stuff in there. But we've done that now, and it's at a good stage. It's actually being used to test several environments daily, as well as staging once a week. And next, we're going to be looking at increasing the coverage. So we're wanting to ensure that more endpoints are covered, or at least every popular or every common endpoint is covered, and as well as trying to add in tests that would be specific for different components. So, for example, we get asked a lot, how do we test Gitly, for example? We need to figure out how to do that for a user-based scenario from an external endpoint. So we're looking at that now and figuring out how to do that. So that's the next steps we're looking at. And that's really it from us.
I can take the next section. There's a short piece of information about the reference architectures that we're working on. For background, we completed the 10K reference architecture last quarter. There's a link there. It's in our docs. And we're working this quarter on completing the 25K and 50K. And when I say 10K, 25K, 50K, that's the number of users using some environment. So if a customer is about 50,000 users, we'd expect this reference environment to be performant for them and be a good configuration that they could base their own setup off of. So we're working on turning that around pretty quickly to support some large potential customer deals that are in the pipeline. And then, Fabio, do you want to take the end-to-end testing framework?
Yeah, for sure. So in the last meeting, in the last AMA that we had, we mentioned that we prefer to create the state in the application when talking about graphical user interface testing. We prefer to create the state fabricating some resources like issues, labels, epics, whatever, using API calls because it's faster and more reliable. So some recent changes that we have made in the end-to-end test framework is that we have added now the ability for you to fabricate some resources like group boards and group board lists, and also project board and project board lists, and project milestones directly via fabrication via API. So the fabrication of these resources is then much faster and more reliable than trying to do that directly through the graphical user interface. And we have also updated the issue resource to now support creating an issue directly via the API with a milestone already set, with weights already set, and with the possibility to assign users to an issue beforehand, so that when you start your test in the issue page, you already have all that information in there. The the next point is we have then worked on a Rubocop rule to avoid using the page keyword in certain conditions to avoid mixing things with the capybara DSL. There's a link to the merge request that did that in the agenda. And during this quarter, Q3, we have been working as well in an initiative called Enterprise Test Gaps, where we are trying to cover enterprise features with integration and end-to-end tests. The goal is to have 100% of coverage. I don't know if we'll get there, but we'll try to get as close as possible. So those were the updates that I wanted to make. And now we can open it for questions. So Alper, you have the first and only question so far in the document. Would you like to vocalize your question?
Hi there. Beyond, scaling in the number of users, do we have any QA performance tests done for, growing number of issues, labels, subgroups, and other, let's say entities in the GitLab product? Like, have you done anything there or?
So we are testing, some of the tests we have do cover large amounts of more common stuff, I'd say, like issues and repos, issues, sorry, not repos yet. We actually use the GitLab CE project as our base for testing. So that comes along with a lot of stuff. And actually now I think of it, it doesn't actually include issues because they're stripped out for sanitization reasons. So at the moment we don't, but that's what I mentioned at the end there, is that the next steps we want for the toolkit is to explore actually testing specific areas of the products instead of just the endpoints. So that would include these areas. So that's something we'll be looking at.
Thanks for taking the question. Next is Christopher. Would you like to vocalize your question?
Yeah, sure thing. It's really just kind of more of a general question of, we've obviously got tons of priorities and tons of things to do. Is there one or two things that we would like to be doing that, just because of capacity or technical issues or challenges that we aren't currently doing that we think is, an area that we should be hitting upon?
I can start with one thing that we have started discussing this week, actually. One thing that we need to do but we are not doing yet is reevaluating our smoke test end-to-end test suite. We realized that we need to do that because last week we had an issue in GitLab.com where there was no end-to-end test to cover that specific scenario. So, and with more features coming on, we need to always be sure that our smoke test suite is updated with the new features that are most important for the users. So this is one thing that is in our radar, but we are not focusing on because the main focus now is the end-to-end test gaps initiative for enterprise features. I can say that there's a lot of improvements to be done in the test framework itself as well, that we try to do like on demand when you are developing something and you notice that something is very complex and you can refactor it beforehand before implementing the new tests, for instance. But I imagine that there are more things, so I will leave it open for anyone else in the quality department that wants to take it over.
Yeah, I'd like to add that our coverage right now, as far as the ratio of test automation engineers to groups, is we're spread a little bit thin. So a lot of the things that we're able to help with and address are higher level or stronger fires, and we're not really able to get in there on a day-to-day basis and provide guidance to engineers on new features that are being added, and really like tightly couple ourselves with each of the groups. So as we're able to hire more, I think that will also help. I think we'll be able to make a lot more day-to-day improvements and have a closer eye on the things that are going on.
Yeah, one other thing that I can think of is, so one of the things that we want is that we are not the only ones responsible for writing these kind of tests. So one initiative that could come in the future that I think it's very important would be kind of a way of mentoring other engineers to use our framework. We have done quite an intense job in documenting it, trying to make the documentation better for others to use. But I think some kind of mentoring program for the test framework would be good as well. I remember that we had a conversation about like when you are creating a new test, maybe we could be like recording everything that we are doing and saying what we are doing so that we can post it as like some kind of training for others. So this is something else that we are not doing, but we could. Does anyone else wants to add anything? If not, does anyone else has any other question? Last time for final question. If there is no other question, we would like to thank you very much for being present here in this meeting, and we'll see you in the next quarter then.